I never imagined I'd be caught up in something like this, yet here I stand. They sent a handful of thugs to my farm, thinking they could pressure me into joining their HOA. What they didn't expect was Rex, my loyal canine trained to protect, or the shotgun I've kept ready for years to defend my home and family. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get any more twisted, the sheriff pulled up, and suddenly they were the ones in hot water. Truth is, you couldn't make this up if you tried. Tell me in the comments if it were you, would you have backed down or stood your ground to protect what's yours? The first thing that struck me wasn't the crash of my gate being smashed apart, it was the silence afterward. Only minutes before, my dairy cows had been murmuring softly in the pasture, a steady nighttime rhythm that always eased me into sleep. Then, suddenly, nothing. The stillness that followed crawled under my skin, like the land itself was holding its breath. This farm has been in my family for 3 generations. Every path, every post, every scar in the soil carries pieces of my father's heart and sweat. It's not just dirt and fences, it's memory, blood, and roots no one can take from me. That sudden silence wasn't just quiet, it was a warning that something terrible was about to unfold. My pulse hammered in my chest as I pulled on my boots and moved toward the door, fully aware this wasn't some harmless midnight nuisance. From the bedroom window, I caught sight of headlights slicing through the dark by my front gate. They weren't steady, they were aggressive, sweeping side to side like spotlights. Rex's low growl surged into a savage bark. His fur bristled, every instinct in him screaming danger before I even fully grasped it. I didn't need to see those headlights up close to understand the threat. Rex knew. His hackles rose, his body coiled like a spring. This wasn't a false alarm. Then came the sound of wood splintering in my gate, the one I built with my own hands, torn apart. My cows started bawling in panic, their cries echoing across the pasture as they bolted in every direction. Hooves thundered like drums in the dirt, and then a sound that cut me to my core, the shrill cry of a calf in pain, followed by silence. Rage ignited in my chest. I snatched my shotgun, checked the chamber, and stepped out into the cold air. The wind carried a metallic scent of blood. Rex shot forward, powerful legs propelling him through the darkness. I followed, boots crunching gravel as the floodlights flicked on, blasting the scene with star-white light. What I saw nearly made me sick. 3 men dressed in dark clothes stood by the wreckage of my gate. One clutched a crowbar, its edge still lined with wood splinters. My gate dangled off one hinge, debris scattered across the drive. Beyond them, my cows were huddled tight against the fence, terrified. A calf lay near the gate, its leg gashed open on twisted metal. The sight of that bleeding animal fueled every ounce of fury in me. Rex lunged at the man with the crowbar. One of the intruders stumbled back in shock, dropping something as he scrambled toward a dark SUV waiting beyond my property. He cursed as he fled, but Rex didn't follow him off my land. He stood guard, muscles taut, eyes locked on the threat. I leveled my shotgun, the weight solid in my hands. My finger brushed the trigger. One step closer, one more second of defiance, and I would have made sure they never forgot this night. Then I spotted the object on the ground, a wallet, leather, flung open under the harsh lights. Inside was a driver's license, Marcus Webb. But tucked behind the cards was something far more telling, a receipt showing a bank transfer from Meadowbrook Heights HOA. The other 2 men hesitated, clearly rattled by Rex's stance and the sight of me armed. One was older, gray beard and nervous eyes, the other younger, a scar slashing across his cheek. I fired a warning shot into the air, the sound cracking through the night like thunder. "Get off my land," I shouted, my voice steady though my blood was boiling. "And tell whoever sent you that Sam Grady doesn't scare easy." They scrambled into their SUV, slammed the doors, and roared off into the darkness. I stood there in the wreckage, breathing hard, surveying the aftermath. My gate ruined, my calf wounded, my hair shaken, but what weighed on me most was the proof in that wallet. Veronica Sloan had been pushing every landowner around here to bend to her hoe for months, and now, blood had been spilled over it. I knelt beside the injured calf, relieved the wound wasn't too deep but knowing it needed care. Rex sat by my side, his breath finally calming, his eyes still sharp and alert. The adrenaline drained out of me, leaving my body shaky, my mind spinning. I knew what tomorrow would bring, calling the vet, filing a police report, replacing my gate. But the questions burned hotter than the chores ahead. Why had they come at night? What did they truly want? And what line would they cross next? Morning brought no comfort, only daylight exposing the damage in full. My coffee went cold in my hands as I stared at the mangled remains of my gate, hinges ripped free, wood shattered across the driveway. Each glance stoked my anger fresh. The herd was restless, huddling instead of grazing. My injured calf hobbled on a limp despite the bandages I had wrapped before sunrise. The vet bill was coming, and it wouldn't be cheap. But this was no longer about repairs or money. This was about blood, flesh, and intimidation. Someone had dared to hurt my animals to make a point. As I measured the broken posts, my neighbor's voice carried over the fence. "Sam, you okay?" I heard my neighbor calling from across the fence. "You alright over there?" Sounded like trouble last night. I filled him in on what had happened, and his expression darkened. "That Sloan woman's been making her rounds, trying to rope everyone into signing up." Not long after, the low hum of an expensive engine drifted up my driveway. A spotless white BMW rolled to a stop just outside my property line, sunlight flashing off its polished chrome. The driver's door opened with a soft click, and out stepped a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a real estate magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her navy blazer crisp, and her heels probably cost more than a month's worth of feet. Veronica Sloan approached with the confidence of someone who had never been denied in her life. In one hand she carried a sleek leather briefcase, in the other a thick folder. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She extended the contract with a polished grace, but the weight of her intent pressed down harder than her polite words. The message was clear: sign, or stand alone. What unsettled me most was the way her gaze skimmed over my ruined gate without the slightest flicker of concern, as if she had expected to see it destroyed. I knew I had to defend not just my farm, but my name. "Mr. Grady," she said in a voice that managed to sound sweet and condescending all at once, "I heard about your unfortunate incident last night. Such a shame for a hard-working man like yourself." She gestured toward the wreckage of my gate, feigning sympathy. I thought this would be the perfect moment to talk about how our association could help prevent these kinds of problems. I set down my measuring tape and walked to meet her, Rex shadowing me, his eyes never leaving this unwelcome visitor. Veronica glanced at the injured calf limping near the gate. For the briefest moment, her face flickered not with concern, but something disturbingly close to satisfaction. "Miss Sloan," I said evenly, "funny timing. Showing up right after my property gets torn apart, almost like you knew it was coming." She popped open her briefcase with practiced precision, pulling out a thick stack of papers bound with a blue cover. "I have a proposition that could solve all your security concerns," she announced, holding it out like a gift. "This is a full membership agreement with our homeowners association. We offer enhanced security, property value protection, and neighborhood standards enforcement. After last night, I'm sure you can see the benefit of organized support." I didn't open it right away. Instead, I studied her face. Her professional mask held steady, but there was calculation in her eyes that unsettled me. "Security, huh?" I said slowly. "Funny how the only threat I've had showed up right before you did. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" This wasn't just a contract. It was an ultimatum. "Sign and surrender my freedom or fight and risk everything." Her laugh rang sharp, brittle, like glass breaking. "Mr. Grady, I think it's unfair to imply our association had anything to do with random vandalism. We're here to prevent exactly these incidents through proper oversight and standards." She swept her hand toward my farm in a dismissive gesture. "Properties without regulation often attract a broken bar undesirable elements. That's simply reality." I'd already heard the whispers. Some neighbors had doubts, others had already bent the knee, trading freedom for the illusion of safety. I flipped through the first few pages of her contract. With each line, my stomach turned. The terms weren't just unreasonably, they were insane. Monthly dues of $300, mandatory compliance with appearance standards, rules for how agricultural operations had to meet their so-called certification. They wanted authority over everything from the color of my barn to the way I bred my cattle. As I read, I realized I was one of the last holdouts. This wasn't about community. It was about control. and then I saw the clause buried deep in the document. Exclusive distribution rights. In plain print, it declared that all dairy products from member farms would be sold only through association-approved vendors. They weren't asking for dues, they wanted ownership of my livelihood. They wanted to control who I sold my milk to, and on what terms. Economic slavery, dressed up in legal jargon. I shut the folder and handed it back. "Quite the contract," I said dryly. "Why not just take my barn keys while you're at it?" My sarcasm bounced off her polished armor. If anything, her smile widened into something sharper, more predatory. She'd faced resistance before Rhea, and she knew how to chip away at it. Her tone hardened as she tucked the papers back into her briefcase. "Mr. Grady, I think you're misunderstanding. Property values in Andromanest communities are consistently higher than in regulated areas. Your neighbors who've already joined are seeing real appreciation in their homes." "And a broken bar if I don't sign?" I asked, though I already knew where this was headed. Her smile turned cold, revealing the steel under her polished mask. This wasn't persuasion, it was a threat dressed in business etiquette. "Well," she said lightly, adjusting her briefcase strap, "non-member properties often struggle to maintain reliable relationships with vendors and service providers. The dairy industry thrives on reputation. It would be such a shame if your milk became a broken bar difficult to sell because of quality concerns." My fists tightened at my sides. She was threatening to poison my reputation, to blacklist me with my own buyers. Years of sweat and sacrifice, reduced to a bargaining chip. And she did it while standing in front of my shattered gate, as though she were the one doing me a favor. Veronica slid back into her BMW, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and the stench of arrogance. The rest of my day blurred into damage control. The vet confirmed what I already knew about the calf's injury. The insurance adjuster took his pictures. I filed the police report. By evening, I was exhausted, but at least the paperwork gave me a record of what had happened. It wasn't until I checked my mailbox before supper that I found Ida a small, folded piece of notebook paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Don't sell your milk tomorrow. It's been poisoned." The handwriting was jagged and rushed, as though scribbled while someone kept glancing over their shoulder. No signature. No clue who left it. But the timing hit like a hammer. Someone knew about Veronica's visit. Someone knew the pressure I was under, and someone was warning me that things were about to get deadly. I stared at the note, heat flaring in my chest. "This isn't about contracts," I muttered. "This is survival, and they're not breaking me that easy." But was this message a lifeline or bait? That question burned in me all night. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If someone was trying to sabotage me, I needed proof. I collected samples from 3 tanks, sealed them in sterile containers, and prepared to deliver them to the Agricultural Extension Office for testing. That's when the rumble of engines pulled me to the window. A convoy of 5 vehicles crept up my driveway in formation, like an inspection team descending. Doors slammed in unison as about 15 people piled out. I recognized face as the neighbors who had already bent to Andromanest's pressure. Veronica Sloan led them, clipboard in hand, dressed differently than the day before but wearing the same predatory smile. "Mr. Grady," she called loudly, ensuring every ear caught her words. "We're here for the community health assessment," I mentioned. I didn't recall her mentioning anything. Still, before I could respond, she was waving her people toward my barn. "Given the security concerns yesterday, we thought it best to ensure your dairy meets proper safety standards." They spread through my barn like they owned it. Most nodded seriously at equipment they didn't understand while Veronica pointed with false authority. But one woman lingered near the feed storage, fiddling with a small container. When she caught me watching, she stuffed it into her purse and walked away quickly. A sound cut through the noisy low, desperate moan from the milking stalls. Bessie, one of my best cows, staggered forward, foam dripping from her mouth. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes glassy. My heart clenched. She'd been perfectly fine an hour ago. I dropped to my knees beside her. Frothy spit spilled from her lips. Her legs trembled beneath her. Whatever was happening, it wasn't natural, it was too sudden, too deliberate. Her pulse raced erratically under my hand. She was alive, but something was very wrong. "I need to call the vet," I muttered, panic creeping into my voice. "Oh my goodness," Veronica's voice rang out theatrically, echoing through the barn. This poor animal appears to be experiencing a serious health crisis. Everyone, step back for your own safety. She whipped out her phone, angling it just right to capture pictures of Bessie's foam-covered mouth. Before I could even pull out my phone to call the vet, Veronica had already seized control of the moment. Given this clear health emergency, she announced, her voice cutting through the barn, "I'm declaring this facility unsafe for public access until further notice." I stared at her in disbelief. What authority did she think she had? Yet her followers nodded and murmured as if she were some kind of official, a few already raising their phones to capture the scene and spread the story. "Hold on just a minute," I snapped, rising to my feet and wiping my hands on my jeans. "You can't just march onto my property and start declaring things. Who gave you that authority?" She ignored me, herding her people toward the exit. The woman who had been near the feed storage slipped past me quickly, refusing to meet my eyes. When the convoy finally pulled away in a cloud of dust, I stayed behind with Bessie and called the veterinarian myself. By the time he arrived, the cow's symptoms had faded. Her breathing was steady, the foam gone, her stance firm again. The vet checked her over carefully but found nothing out of the ordinary. "Could have been an allergic reaction," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't quite buy it either. The timing bothered him just as much as it haunted me. The rest of my morning dissolved into phone calls, but word in a small community moves faster than fire in dry grass, especially when it involves food safety. My regular milk customers began canceling their orders one by one. A woman who had bought from me for over a decade called, her voice laced with concern, telling me she'd heard my herd was diseased. The grocery store manager left a voicemail suspending our contract until the health issues were cleared up. In less than 4 hours after that staged inspection, my entire customer base was crumbling. Years of trust, wiped away in a single morning. By late afternoon, the rumors had spread everywhere: the co-op, the feed store, even the bank that held my farm loan. One caller from the co-op asked with genuine worry if I needed help with quarantine procedures. It was a domino effect, each rumor knocking over the next. I tried calling customers back, explaining that the vet had found nothing wrong and my milk tested clean, but doubt, once seated, grows quickly. Most people politely declined to continue business. Some didn't bother to return my calls at all. That evening, I stood in the barn, staring at my healthy herd grazing peacefully, the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't about membership anymore. Veronica was dismantling my livelihood, turning neighbors into enemies through carefully staged crises. It wasn't just Bessie, it was too neat, too deliberate. The strange powder near the trough, the timing of her arrival, it was orchestrated. And every trail led back to her. I kicked at a loose board in frustration. "What's next?" I muttered bitterly. "A permit for every moo?" That's when I noticed Ida, a small vial half buried under the hay. It wasn't dust. It was something dangerous. Someone had poisoned my cows, and I knew exactly who stood to gain. I picked it up, the weight of it heavy in my hand. This wasn't just sabotage, it was a warning. And as the crunch of tires echoed on the gravel outside, I knew someone was watching. The lab results later confirmed what I'd expected. No poison, no contamination, nothing official to explain what had happened. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The rumor mill had chewed through my reputation and spat it out. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table drafting a letter to the livestock auction house, asking for quotes on selling my herd. The words felt like swallowing glass, but I couldn't see another way forward. Rex padded into the kitchen while I wrestled with the decision, dropping something metallic at my feet. A 3-inch bolt, scratched along the threads, one I'd never seen before. He wagged his tail, then trotted to the pump house, glancing back as if to say, "Come on, I've found something." That's when I noticed the pump wasn't running. The housing around the main mechanism had been tampered with, the bolts missing, the access panel partly dismantled. Inside, I found key components deliberately loosened. The intake valve was barely holding on, and the pressure regulator had been adjusted to dangerous levels. If the pump had been left running like that, it would have destroyed itself within hours, cutting off water to my entire herd. I was still crouched over the damage when I heard a vehicle pull up. Sheriff Robert Hayes stepped out of his patrol car, a big man in his 50s with weathered features and sharp eyes. He carried the weight of years dealing with rural disputes. "Sam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "got some paperwork yesterday about ongoing issues out here. Thought I'd come take a look." The way he said it made me wonder what paperwork and who had filed it. His voice was polite but careful, like he was fitting puzzle pieces together. I showed him the sabotaged pump, explained about the missing bolts and the deliberate tampering. He inspected the unit closely, snapping photos and jotting notes in his small book. When I tied it back to Veronica's threats and the staged inspection, his face didn't dismiss it. He looked thoughtful. "Ms. Sloan did file some documentation," he admitted. "Concerns about agricultural safety standards, but fees a broken bar. This is something else." "You think I'd sabotage my own farm?" I asked, holding up the damaged bolt Rex had found. "You think I'd strangle my own herd just for attention?" Hayes rolled the bolt between his fingers. "This wasn't random. Whoever did it knew exactly which parts to target for maximum damage without immediate failure." Before I could answer, voices drifted from the pasture. Too many voices. Hayes and I followed the sound, and what we found made my blood boil. 3 men with cameras were crowding the herd, while another spread something near the fence line. They weren't documenting, they were staging. One man jabbed a cow with a stick, trying to provoke distress for the camera. Another sprinkled a white powder near the trough, setting up evidence of contamination. The whole operation was designed to frame my farm as unsafe. The moment they spotted us, they scrambled. But Rex was faster. He charged toward the fence, a growl tearing from his throat. One photographer stumbled back, his expensive camera flying into a mud puddle with a satisfying splash. "Gentlemen," Hayes barked, his hand resting near his radio, authority dripping from his tone, "mind explaining what you're doing here without permission?" They stammered excuses about documentation and public safety, but the sheriff pressed them. "No credentials, no authority, just trespassers with an agenda." As Hayes collected their information and sent them off, I retrieved the mud-smeared camera. The memory card was intact. Scrolling through, I saw exactly what I expected: staged images making my farm look dangerous, exaggerated angles, false contamination shots. The last pictures showed the white powder being spread at the trough. Hayes examined the photos, his expression tightening. Combined with the pump sabotage and the staged inspection, it was too much to dismiss. "Looks like Rex doesn't do retakes," I muttered as the sheriff documented everything. For the first time since this began, I saw recognition in his eyes. He was starting to connect the dots. But when Hayes drove off, leaving me by the pump with the muddy camera in my hand, I noticed something else. Fresh tire tracks by the tree line. They weren't from the photographers. Wide impressions, like an SUV or heavy truck, parked in a spot with a perfect view of the farmyard. Whoever it was had been watching. I followed the tracks about 50 yards until they disappeared onto the road. Nearby, I found cigarette butts and a coffee cup still warm. Someone had been sitting there for hours, observing everything. This wasn't curiosity, it was surveillance. Walking back as night fell, I kept glancing toward the woods. The sense of being watched clung to me. Rex stayed close, hackles raised, eyes flicking to the tree line as if he felt it too. My farm didn't feel like home anymore. It felt exposed. By the time I reached town hall, the meeting lot was overflowing. More cars than I'd ever seen at an HOA gathering. Neighbors clustered outside, whispering in tight groups. Conversations stopped cold when I approached. The rumors had spread beyond my control. Inside, tension hung in the air like static. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table at the front. Veronica sat there, shuffling papers with the smug calm of someone ready to deliver a knockout blow. She'd dressed the part: a crisp white blouse, dark suit, hair pulled back tight. Her outfit and posture projected pure authority. I slipped into a seat at the back, hoping to watch without drawing much attention. But with Rex sitting loyally by my side, there was no chance of blending in. Veronica rapped her gavel sharply, her voice cutting through the packed room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. We have urgent community safety concerns to address, and I wanted everyone to hear the facts directly." The way she emphasized facts sent a chill through me. She gestured toward a man at the end of the table, someone I'd never seen before, dressed in a navy blazer and holding an expensive-looking portfolio. "Mr. Thompson here represents the Community Health Assessment Board," she announced, "and his findings are troubling." The so-called inspector stood and began speaking in a calm, measured tone that suggested years in public health. He rattled off phrases about contamination protocols, monitoring standards, and compliance issues, enough technical jargon to sound convincing, but never enough specifics to be pinned down. The audience seemed impressed, nodding at his polished delivery, but something about his presentation didn't sit right with me. When he described bacterial testing methods, his explanations didn't match what I knew about veterinary science. His timeline for infection spread was flat out wrong. Still, his confidence carried weight with the crowd. "Mr. Thompson," I said, rising so my voice carried across the hall, "what specific pathogens did your testing identify on my farm?" The room fell silent. All eyes swung toward me like I'd interrupted a sermon. Thompson froze for half a second before glancing nervously at Veronica. "Well," he stammered, "the preliminary assessments indicate potential vectors for contamination that require further investigation. We're still awaiting laboratory confirmation." His polished act was cracking. That's when Emily Carter, my neighbor from a couple farms over, stood up. She looked unsettled, phone in hand. "Before this goes any further, I need to show everyone something," she said, her voice firm. She played a video on her phone, grainy, distant footage yet but clear enough. Several people were dumping white powder by my water troughs, their voices faint but audible, talking about timing and coordination. "I didn't think much of it at the time," Emily explained. "I figured maybe county workers doing some testing, but after hearing all this talk about contamination, I thought people should see it." The room erupted with hushed whispers. Veronica's confident mask slipped into something calculating. "That footage is completely out of context," she insisted, her voice firm. "Property safety inspections sometimes use specialized materials that may look suspicious." Half the room seemed satisfied with that excuse, nodding along, but the farmers weren't buying it. They knew real testing didn't involve secret powders or shady behavior. The crowd was dividing in two, and Veronica seemed almost pleased to pit neighbor against neighbor. She wasn't just targeting my farm, she was targeting me. She wanted to destroy my name, twist every whisper and rumor into a weapon. Meanwhile, the fake inspector quietly packed his things, trying to slip away. "I have another appointment," he muttered, avoiding eye contact as he hurried for the door. His sudden exit didn't go unnoticed. People started asking sharp questions about his credentials and methods. And then Veronica made her mistake. Instead of holding her polished front, she lashed out. "This man is a danger to our community," she shouted, jabbing a finger at me. "His negligence already caused one livestock health crisis, and his refusal to take responsibility puts us all at risk." Her voice climbed into a near scream. The room exploded into arguments, supporters demanding action, skeptics demanding proof. Veronica was unraveling in front of everyone, her temper shredding the image of calm authority she'd worked so hard to craft. "If he won't accept community standards," she roared, "then we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of operation he's running." The venom in her words stunned even her supporters. The mask was gone. What stood beneath it was pure malice. As neighbors filed out, disgust plain on their faces, the split in the community became visible. Emily was quickly surrounded by farmers asking about her video. Others clustered around the inspector's abandoned paperwork, studying his credentials with growing suspicion. The lines had been drawn. Neighbors were choosing sides. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, but the calls from neighbors weren't to check if I was okay. They wanted to question my honesty. Veronica drifted toward me with an expression that made my skin crawl. The crowd had mostly moved outside, their voices carrying into the parking lot, leaving the two of us standing almost alone in the big room. "You think you've won tonight," she said softly, her tone far more chilling than her earlier shouts. She leaned closer so no one else could hear. "You have no idea what you've started. You just signed your own death warrant." The words hung heavy, and though I tried to brush them off, the threat clung to me. Later that night, an anonymous letter slid under my door, told me to leave town or face the consequences. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare me anymore, they were promising something darker. Morning brought proof of it. Every single one of my cows stood in the pasture without their ear tags. 37 animals, stripped clean of the numbered markers that served as their legal identification. These weren't fallen tags, they'd been cut with perfect precision, like surgical work. I froze at the fence, coffee mug slipping from my hand. Without those tags, my cows were legally worthless. No dairy would accept milk from unidentified livestock, no matter how healthy they looked. It wasn't vandalism, it was economic suffocation. The milk truck arrived like always. I watched the driver's face shift from a friendly smile to confusion, then alarm. "Sam, what happened to your tags?" he asked, already pulling out his clipboard. "You know I can't take milk from untagged cows." Within an hour, the phone started again, neighbors calling but not with sympathy. One accused me of hiding sick animals by removing their IDs. Another suggested I was planning to sell cattle illegally. The missing tags didn't just cripple my buzziness, they painted me as a criminal. When I finally got the Department of Agriculture on the line, the news was worse. Replacements would take weeks, maybe months, buried under forms, certifications, inspections, and thousands of dollars I didn't have. By noon, 3 different buyers had canceled their contracts. I sat at the kitchen table staring at a blank sheet of paper, trying to draft a letter to the auction house. Selling my herd felt like surrender, but keeping them meant bleeding money while I waited for the bureaucracy to grind along. I thought about calling Sheriff Hayes, but what could he really do about missing tags? I even considered hiring a lawyer, when Rex's frantic barking outside pulled me back to my feet. His tone told me it was important. I followed him to the old equipment shed. He was pawing at a pile of feed sacks, whining, glancing back at me as if begging me to understand. I shoved the sacks aside and found a canvas bag hidden underneath. It rattled as I lifted it, my hands trembling. Inside were dozens of ear tags and my herd's exact numbers, perfectly cut, collected, and stashed. Not destroyed, not discarded, hidden. Each one showed the same precise cuts, the work of someone trained and equipped. This wasn't teenagers playing a prank. It was deliberate, professional sabotage. Fresh footprints in the dirt trailed away from the hiding spot toward a vantage point that overlooked my barn and house. Whoever did this had been close enough to watch, close enough to enjoy my reaction. The thought made my chest burn with anger. I crumpled the half-written auction letter and tossed it across the room. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was systematic destruction, erasing my ability to function as a farmer, erasing me out of options. I scrolled through old contacts until I found Jake Morrison's number. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, but I pressed call. "Sam, holy hell, it's been forever," Jake said, his enthusiasm a lifeline. I spent nearly half an hour unloading everything at the break-ins, the staged inspections, the missing tags. He listened, scribbling notes in the background. "This isn't random," Jake said when I finished. "It's organized extortion disguised as community activism. This isn't just a power-hungry HOA president. Someone's running a full-blown operation to force you out." His words were both terrifying and a strange relief. At least someone else saw the pattern. Jake promised to come down that weekend, interview witnesses, document evidence. "If this is half as bad as you're saying, it's front-page material," he said. "People need to know this kind of corruption is happening in rural America." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. Then Jake added one last detail. "I've already started digging into Veronica Sloan," he said. "Her RA tilde copyright some A tilde copyright doesn't check out. Conflicting job histories, weird financial records, a broken bar. I think this goes way beyond your town." The possibility that Veronica was running the same scam elsewhere chilled me more than anything, and as I looked out at my tagless herd grazing quietly, I realized the nightmare wasn't just local anymore. The herd grazed quietly under the late sun, but I couldn't shake the certainty that Veronica wasn't finished. She had already gone further than I thought anyone could. Her whispered threat replayed in my head, and I wondered what someone desperate enough to steal identification tags might do once a newspaper started sniffing around. That night, the knock came hard enough to rattle the door. Rex was there first, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. I grabbed my shotgun, unsure whether I'd be greeting Jake or whoever had been stalking me from the shadows all day. Through the front window, I caught sight of Veronica standing on the porch with 4 men who were clearly not friendly neighbors. These weren't volunteers from the community, they were hired muscle. The kind of men brought in when intimidation was the goal. Her smile was painted on, thin and dangerous. The men spread out with practiced precision, blocking exits. Veronica held up a sheaf of papers and called out in her most theatrical voice, "Mr. Grady, I have a court order for immediate inspection due to ongoing agricultural violations." I kept the chain lock fastened and answered through the narrow crack. "Court orders don't get served at midnight, Veronica, and they sure don't come with bodyguards. Whatever you're pulling, you've crossed the line." 2 of the thugs shifted toward my windows, ready to break in. Rex launched himself through the opening like a missile, teeth sinking into the arm of the nearest man. His screams tore through the night as blood spilled onto my porch. I stepped outside, shotgun raised, and fired a warning shot into the air. The crack echoed across the farm like thunder. "Next one goes lower," I shouted, my voice steady. The men froze, their confidence wavering now that they realized this wasn't going to be easy money. Veronica screamed at them to restrain Rex and disarm me, but hesitation had already set in. None of them wanted to gamble with their lives against a dog and a farmer who wasn't bluffing. The injured man writhed on the ground, cursing as Rex held him pinned. I nodded toward the papers Veronica clutched in her trembling hands. "Those better be legitimate," I warned, "because Sheriff Hayes is on his way." Sirens were already cutting through the distance, growing louder by the second. Patrol cars rolled into the yard, red and blue lights flashing, and stepping out of one of them, camera in hand, was Jake Morrison, ready to capture everything. "Miss Sloan," Sheriff Hayes barked, his voice sharp and commanding, "hand over those documents, and your men need to back away from this property." Now, the presence of multiple officers erased any illusion of control Veronica still clung to. Under the glare of the porch light, Hayes studied the papers, his trained eyes catching details I'd already noticed and more that only a sheriff would recognize. "These documents are fraudulent," he declared for everyone present. "The formatting is wrong, the signatures are forged, and the legal procedures they reference don't even exist here." Veronica's last card had just been ripped from her hand. Her face crumpled as Hayes cuffed her, while the hired muscle were rounded up by deputies. The man Rex had taken down was loaded into an ambulance, still bleeding and swearing. Hayes spoke into his radio with a tone that carried more weight than I'd ever heard from him. "This is Sheriff Hayes requesting federal fraud investigators. We're looking at organized criminal activity involving forged legal documents and systematic extortion." The word federal turned the entire situation from a neighborhood dispute into a national crime. Hayes looked up from his radio, his expression grave. "Ms. Sloan has already been under investigation for running similar schemes in other states." Sheriff Hayes explained the situation to the neighbors who had gathered, making it clear that what happened tonight was only the latest chapter in a much larger pattern of organized fraud. Jake worked methodically, interviewing witnesses and recording evidence, his camera capturing everything for the record. As Hayes walked Veronica toward his patrol car, she shot me a look filled with venom. For a moment, though, I caught something else in her eyes, a fear. She hadn't expected me to fight back, not like this. Her voice was low and unsteady as she hissed, "You think this is over? I still have people you haven't met yet." But the words rang hollow, the desperate threat of someone who had already lost control. The injured man Rex had taken down was already giving up details to avoid serious charges, spilling information about the larger network behind her. Even with Veronica in custody, I knew untangling the damage she'd caused would take time. Neighbors had been divided, trust had been broken, and my farm's reputation would need careful rebuilding. The immediate storm had passed, but recovery would be its own battle. By morning, news of the confrontation had spread through the county like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Calls poured in, some from neighbors checking on me, others from reporters wanting interviews about what they were already calling the HOA takedown. By mid-morning, a federal agent arrived. She looked like someone who had been following this case for months, not hours, and she spent hours interviewing me about every detail of Veronica's campaign. She explained that the evidence we'd gathered tied together dozens of cases across state lines. "We've confirmed more than 80 victims across 6 states," she said, flipping through her notes. The losses exceed $3 million. Families have lost homes to this scheme. Your resistance provided the breakthrough we needed to connect everything. That knowledge, that my struggle had helped others, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The federal investigation revealed a machine far bigger than I'd imagined. Veronica had been running variations of the same scam across the country, supported by shell companies, phony credentials, and actors posing as inspectors or officials. Even some of her supposed supporters in the community were paid recruits. Later that day, Hayes stopped by with updates. He sat at my kitchen table, looking more satisfied than I'd ever seen him. The guy Rex put down gave us the whole playbook of bank accounts, communications, records of every victim. They kept everything written down. We've got them nailed. The community's response was immediate. A longtime customer brought me a fresh pie along with a tearful apology. The grocery store manager personally reinstated my contract and even paid a premium to cover my losses. 3 feed suppliers extended credit, and the co-op voted to waive my fees for the rest of the year. Emily Carter organized what she called a thank you dinner at the community center. Families showed up with casseroles, pies, and desserts, turning the night into an impromptu town hall. This time, instead of division, neighbors talked about building a real watch program, one based on support instead of intimidation. Jake's article dominated Sunday's front page, complete with photographs of the fake documents and interviews with victims from other states. The headline read, "Federal Bust Ends Multi-State Extortion Ring." By Monday, national outlets had picked up the story. The most satisfying moment came when federal agents returned and forced to dismantle the rest of Veronica's network. From my front gate, I watched them lead away the surveillance crew, the document forgers, and the handlers who had been running parallel operations in nearby counties. Justice was no longer just a hope, it was happening right in front of me. The Department of Agriculture expedited my replacement tag paperwork and even issued a commendation for my role in exposing the fraud. My local vet offered free care for my herd, and the state extension office asked to use my farm as an example of proper agricultural practices. Enrique, my loyal, fearless companion, who became a local hero. Kids at the elementary school wanted to meet him, pet him, and hear the story of the dog who'd stood his ground against criminals. The paper even ran a feature about working dogs, with Rex at the center of it. Rex had become a symbol of resilience, featured prominently as an example of how working animals safeguard rural communities. He seemed to enjoy the attention, though his loyalty never wavered. His focus remained on protecting the herd. 2 weeks after Veronica's arrest, I received an official letter from the federal prosecutor's office. The message was clear. The criminal network had been completely dismantled. Their assets were being seized to compensate victims, and the key players were facing prison terms ranging from a decade to a quarter of a century. The nightmare was finally over. Soon after, the children from the local elementary school arrived with their teacher. They carried hand-drawn pictures of Rex and brought homemade cookies shaped like cows. Their teacher explained that my fight had become part of a classroom lesson on standing up to bullies and the power of community. That simple gesture meant more to me than any award from the government. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the herd grazed peacefully with their new ear tags glinting in the fading light, I stood on my porch reflecting on the journey. What once felt like relentless attacks now seemed like stepping stones toward justice. Every desperate move Veronica had made ended up giving investigators more proof against her. The fake HOA signs that once spread fear were replaced with genuine welcome messages reflecting the true heart of rural life. Neighbors were reconnecting, supporting local businesses, and working together to ensure no outsider could exploit them again. Out of division, unity had grown. Sheriff Hayes stopped by one last time with items that had been held as evidence. Handing them back, he looked me in the eye and said, "You did something extraordinary here, Sam. Most people would have folded under the pressure. Your refusal to give in exposed a criminal ring that was destroying families far beyond this county." That night, I settled into my chair with Rex curled at my feet and my herd safe in their enclosure. I couldn't help but think about the larger lesson. They had sent thugs to intimidate me, but they were met by my loyal dog, a warning shot from my shotgun, and eventually, the sheriff with the full weight of federal law behind him. That was enough to bring their entire empire down. The irony wasn't lost on me. Veronica's downfall was fueled by her own arrogance. If she had stopped early, she might have succeeded. But her obsession with escalation gave law enforcement exactly what they needed. That final attempt with fake federal papers was the thread that unraveled everything. They tried to break me, but they underestimated the resolve of a farmer defending his land. If you've stuck with me through this journey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? If you want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that super thanks button below. Stay strong, protect what's yours, never back down. That's a wrap from Anna Dramanest. But don't go far, there are plenty more twists, dramas, and unbelievable stories waiting for you on our channel.